Pleased to be here with all of you this morning. Welcome to our talk on asexuality and aromanticism, understanding the A spectrum. My name is Allison Burgess, and I work as the director of the Sexual and Gender Diversity Office. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm thrilled to be here with all of you this morning. I have white skin, brown eyes, short brown hair. I'm wearing a headset. I'm wearing a floral collared shirt with a black sweater over top of it. And as I said before, today's event is being recorded. Before we start, please note that we have live captioning available today. The live captions can be accessed in the Zoom menu by clicking the CC button or by clicking on the three dots to get the More menu and then selecting Show Subtitles. A special thank you to our live captioners who are joining us today. We understand access to be a shared responsibility between everyone in the space. In addition to the live captions, we've strived to create an accessible space that proactively eliminates barriers to participation. We also welcome disability and the changes that it brings. Is there anything about the virtual space that we should address now? Can we support any other access needs today? I invite you to respond in the chat or directly message Carmen Kamen in the chat should you have any suggestions or additional ways that we can support you in this space today. We'll also add that if you'd like to rename yourself, you can do so through the Zoom platform. That feature has been enabled in today's session. Throughout the session today, the Zoom chat will also be open if you want to post your comments throughout the event. If you need any assistance with the Zoom platform, please send a direct message to Carmen. Of course, with great freedom comes great responsibility, and we know that folks will make use of that space in that way. To begin, I'd like to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. I'm calling in today to today's call from East Toronto, the land of the Huron-Wendat. I honor and appreciate the role that land acknowledgements play in being a point for all of us to reflect on which values drive the relationships that are built between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities in our professional and personal capacities. The calls to action outlined by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada are not meant to stay on paper, tucked away on a shelf, but in fact, these calls provide us with pathways to foster inclusive environments for all Indigenous communities. This includes U of T's calls to action as well. Have you read them? Have you considered how these calls to action might be brought into your work? If not, I'd encourage you to do so. We're mindful of security concerns while using this platform. If there are any major disruptions that interrupt the host's ability to keep control of the Zoom platform, a member from the organizing team will ask everyone to log off immediately and the session will be adjourned. If there are any inappropriate verbal or written communications, individuals will be removed immediately. We are asking that we as a community hold each other accountable for maintaining a space of safety, accountability, respect, and inclusion. Let us work together to have an enjoyable and informative session. The Sexual and Gender Diversity Office acknowledges that we are all on our own learning journeys to deepening and broadening our knowledge of sexual and gender diversity. Educational spaces like this provide us with critical opportunities to explore and unpack questions, thoughts, ideas, and perspectives, which may not always be a comfortable experience. These discussions, though difficult at times, play a critical role in countering all forms of discrimination on the basis of gender, sex, and sexuality, and in bringing about meaningful change. I remind us all, as we participate in today's session, to be mindful and reflective of the impact that each of us makes with our words and actions. Let's be mindful of the space we participate in to foster an inclusive and respectful learning space, but that is also a space of curious inquiry. Today's session focuses on the A spectrum, providing an overview of asexuality and aromanticism as queer identities. And I'm so excited that the SGDO is hosting this conversation and that there's so many of you here to engage in this conversation together. I look forward to learning and thinking together to broaden our collective knowledge about ace and aro identities. We know that many of our students accessing the SGDO identify as ACE and ARO, and so too do so many staff, faculty, and librarians at U of T. In today's session, Associate Professor Liza Blake will offer an overview of asexuality and aromanticism. This talk will cover topics such as how to understand asexuality as an orientation, differentiated attractions, marginalization and invisibility, as well as different forms that acephobia and arophobia can take. It will also include key concepts of asexuality studies, such as compulsory sexuality, allonormativity, ammonormativity, and discuss ways that understanding these identities will continue to filter into academic research. And it will conclude with some concrete tips about how to create spaces that are more inclusive to asexuals and aromantics. It's my great privilege today and honor to welcome today's featured guest speaker, Dr. Liza Blake. Dr. Liza Blake is an associate professor of English at the University of Toronto and is currently the Martha L.A. McCain Faculty Fellow at the Queer and Trans Research Lab, a collaborative research project based at the Bonham Center for Sexual Diversity Studies at U of T. Dr. Blake works in early modern literature studies, as well as asexuality studies and aromanticism studies. She helped to create and maintain the online resource, the Asexuality and Aromanticism Bibliography. I'm looking forward to hearing Dr. Blake's presentation, and following the presentation, there will be opportunities to ask questions and engage in discussions together. We will open the space for those Q&A, but in the meantime, if you have questions as they come up during the talk, just know that Dr. Blake will not be addressing those during the talk, but we'll take those up at the end. I'd welcome you to send those to Carmen Kamen along the way, should questions arise through the talk. And with that said, Dr. Blake, it's over to you. Let me stop sharing my slides now and let you take over.
Thank you so much, Allison, and thank you everyone for coming today. My name is Liza Blake. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a white woman with lavender hair, and I'm wearing glasses, earrings in the colors of the ACE and ARO flags, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And it probably won't be visible, but just so you know, a gray t-shirt that has the words NOPE on it in dark green, light green, white, and gray letters. A lot of the slides that I'm going to share are somewhat text heavy. I may not read every word that's on the slide, but I will either summarize the content or sort of read out the ones that I think are important. When a slide has an image that is important to the content and not just silly decoration, I'll try to give image descriptions as well. This talk is going to be in 3 parts. So part 1 is sort of what I'm thinking of as asexuality and aromanticism 101, sort of talking about what these identities are in basic terminology. Part 2, I'm going to talk about asexuality and aromanticism studies, sort of as academic fields. And then in part 3, as was mentioned, I'm going to provide some concrete tips about what we can do to make things better for asexual and aromantic students at the U of T. And the sort of assumed audience of that third section especially is sort of University of Toronto faculty and staff. Before I dive in, just one more thing, a couple content warnings. I will be talking about acephobia and arophobia during this talk, as well as sexual violence. As we get closer to those moments, I will give you another content warning just to prepare you. All right, with that, let's dive in. This is the section I'm calling ACE and ARO 101. How do we think about these as queer identities? And I'll start with an image description on this slide. In the top left is the asexual flag, which from the bottom up is purple, white, gray, and black. Now, the basic definition of asexuality is an asexual person is a person who does not experience sexual attraction. And this is called the AVEN definition because it's the definition offered by the Asexuality Visibility and Education Network. This is the most common definition that you will see if you see any definition at all. Notice that the emphasis is on attraction, someone who does not experience sexual attraction. That's because asexuality does not describe the amount of sex drive or libido that somebody has. Instead, it notes a pattern of attraction, right? So if you're homosexual, that has nothing to do with how much sex you have. It has you are attracted to same, hetero attracted to different, a attracted to none. Notice that because it describes action, it also does not describe, or because it names attraction, it doesn't describe action. So it's not whether or not somebody has sex or whether they're a virgin or whether they've chosen celibacy. Again, a pattern of attraction, which is what makes it an orientation in the modern sense. And one of the reasons that the AVEN definition put so much emphasis on attraction and therefore on orientation is because it helps us advocate for rights alongside other sexual minorities. My sort of definition, slightly different from the AVEN one, is just expanded to be a little bit more inclusive of all the identities on the asexuality umbrella. So not only someone who does not experience sexual attraction, but also someone who only experiences it rarely. That would include gray asexuals, or under a specific set of circumstances, that would include demisexuals and other sort of micro labels, which I'll talk about later. There are other definitions as well. So, for example, Sharonda Brown in their book Refusing Compulsory Sexuality defines it as, quote, a relationship to sex that is atypical to what has been decided on by society at large to be normative. So this is not the only definition, but it is the most sort of common one, this AVEN one. Another key thing for thinking about asexuality is two different axes that represent one's thoughts about or relationships to sex. As a shorthand, we'll call them the sort of social versus the personal axes. So the social axis is your attitude towards sex in general or sex in society, sort of how you feel about sex more generally. And this runs from sex positive, sex neutral, and sex negative. The personal axis is your attitude about sex for yourself, whether you're interested in having it and how you feel about it. And that axis runs from sex favorable, sex indifferent, and sex averse. And it's useful to articulate these two different axes because one of the most common things I get when I come out to someone as asexual is the assumption that I am sex negative, that because I might not personally want it, I might assume that everyone else shouldn't be having it either. And in fact, nearly every ace person I know, I actually can't think of any exceptions, even if they themselves are sex averse and are not interested in having sex personally, tend to be sex positive, right? As long as it's safe sex between two consenting people, go for it. You have fun. And so one shorthand or one sort of joke that I often make is that a lot of the ace community tends to be the opposite of American Republicans who are sex negative, thinks nobody should be having it, and yet sex favorable, think they should, but no one else should, right? Aces tend to be on the other side of things. Note that this works for romance as well. So even though personally I am romance averse, I'm not interested in being in a relationship. I think Valentine's Day is adorable, so I'm sort of romance positive. Other important concepts that come out of ace and aro community discussions is differentiated attractions and differentiated orientations. If you have heard about this at all, you've probably heard it called the split attraction model, or SAM for short. That terminology has a slightly aphobic history, so I'm going to call them differentiated attractions in this talk. As the last slide may have indicated, people who are in the ace community, the asexual community, have developed a lot of specific vocabularies to sort of break down experiences of attraction that often get sort of bundled up together in the non-asexual population. And this is where differentiated attractions come in. So if you have differentiated attractions, then you are very oriented, which means that your romantic and sexual orientations might not be aligned. So you might be asexual, but homo-romantic, for instance. In that case, you're very oriented, your orientations don't line up or match. If you're peri-oriented, your sexual and romantic attractions are aligned or are identical, and they're sort of bundled up with you together. And I just want to acknowledge that I'm taking the language or using the language of differentiated attraction at the recommendation of the blogger Sankestra, who points out that this terminology, quote, refers to the much larger ideas of identifying and differentiating between different kinds of aspects of or parts of attraction. Okay, so now that you know that these different kinds of attractions and orientations exist, let's talk about aromanticism. An image description at the top left of this slide is an arrow flag or an aromantic flag, which from the top goes dark green, light green, white, gray, and black. Now, usually when someone is defining aromanticism, if they're talking about it at all, it will be modeled on the sort of Avon definition of asexuality. So while an asexual person is someone who experiences little or no sexual attraction, an aromantic person is someone who experiences little or no romantic attraction or experiences it rarely or under a specific set of circumstances. Some aromantics, and this includes what the fuck aromantics, WTF aromantics, or qua romantics, call themselves that because they don't always feel comfortable knowing what romantic attraction is or routing their definition through the concept of attraction. And so you can see that the Aurea definition, which is the sort of aromantic equivalent of AVEN, the Aromantic Spectrum Union for Recognition, Education, and Advocacy, you can see that the Aurea definition of aromanticism works slightly differently than the AVEN one does. Aromanticism, the Aurea definition says, is romantic orientation, which describes people whose experience of romance is disconnected from normative societal expectations. This disconnection from normative expectations can be as a result of attraction. It might also be due to feeling repulsed by romance or uninterested in romantic relationships. And you'll notice there that definition of aromanticism offers attraction as an option, but also sort of carves out some space for choice or volition as well. In addition to sexual and romantic attraction, there are other ways of describing attraction. Image description for this slide, there's a chart with 3 columns, and the column headings are type of attraction, definition, and associated crush type. I actually I don't agree with all parts of this chart, but I'm just flashing it up to show you that there are different ways of thinking about attraction, right? So in addition to sexual and romantic, there's aesthetic attraction, sensual or sensuous attraction, altruist attraction, and so on. When we talk about differentiated attractions, it includes all these other kinds as well. Other key terminology coming out of ACE and ARA communities. So allo as a prefix means roughly works sort of like cis does when you're thinking about trans issues. It literally means other. So an allosexual is someone who is not on the asexual spectrum, and an alloromantic person is a person who is not on the aromantic spectrum. Other sort of abbreviations, shorthands that I'm going to use for the rest of this talk. ACE simply is a shorthand for asexual. It's not an acronym, it's just the first syllable rather, of the word asexual. Arrow is sort of the shorthand for aromantic. You pronounce it like the thing you shoot out of a bow. And if someone is both asexual and aromantic, they may go by arrow ace, which is just those 2 words put together. And image description, I've put up 2 versions of the arrow ace flag on this slide. The first one is basically the arrow flag and the ace flag stuck together on the black stripes. The second one, which is often called the sunset flag, goes from the top orange, yellow, white, light blue, dark blue. Allo is sort of a shorthand for someone who is not asexual and or not aromantic. Note that allo has other meanings in other contexts as well. So for example, you'll sometimes see autism versus allism. And then finally, QPR. I'm not really going to talk about QPRs in this talk. That's a whole other hour. But it's something you'll see coming up a lot in ARO-ACE discussions. It just stands for queer platonic relationship. Usually it's a kind of relationship you will seek out if you want to be in some sort of long-term partnership that is not romantic or sexual. This is my last sort of label or terminology slide for a while, I promise. A-spec, or the A spectrum or the A spectra, is simply a shorthand for of or on the asexual and or aromantic spectrum. It includes asexuals or aces and aromantics or aros. But it's also important to note that the ace and aro spectra both include several other identities that are part of that spectrum as well. The most common that you'll hear about will be gray asexual and gray aromantic. This means sort of rarely experiencing sexual romantic attraction. Maybe it'll happen 4 or 5 times in your life, but you don't feel comfortable fully IDing as ace or as aro. It also includes demisexual or demi-romantic, which means only experiencing that kind of attraction after a really deep emotional connection. But it also includes over 100 of aspec and arospec identities. These are sometimes called micro-labels. And here is just a slide that has sort of 20 flags from the A spectrum and Aero spectrum. I'm not going to run through what all of these flags are. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about microlabels in the Q&A if you like. But the sort of important thing to know about the A spectrum is that it offers a lot of really specialized vocabulary to describe kinds of attractions and relationship to desire, again, in ways that often get sort of bundled up with allos. We've gotten really good in the ace and aro communities at really specifying what our relationship is to attraction and desire. Okay, before the next slide, I'll just, as promised, give you a content warning, which is I'm about to talk about aphobia. Okay, so let's talk about aphobia. And this slide will also mention conversion therapy as well as sexual violence. Generally, when someone says aphobia, what they actually mean is acephobia, but aphobia also includes arophobia, aromantic phobia as well. It includes, and I'm just going to give you some examples, invisibility and erasure. So if I come out to someone as asexual, and they respond, low libido doesn't count as an orientation, celibacy doesn't count as an orientation, you just want attention, you're probably a closeted lesbian, I get that one a lot. What it means to be human is to have desire. All of these are ways of sort of making asexuality and aromanticism invisible as an orientation, and or erasing it as an orientation. Invalidation, how do you know you just haven't met the right person yet? Exclusion, and this is especially from within queer communities. Not having sex isn't queer. Aces aren't oppressed or don't face violence and therefore shouldn't get to claim queerness. And what a definition of queerness, if so. Aces have invisible privilege. They can go under the radar, and so they have a privilege that others don't. It also includes dehumanization. So if somebody says sexual attraction is essential to humanity, are you a robot? Are you a psychopath? Do you have a soul? Of allosexual aros, so aros who are allosexual but aromantic, the assumption that they just want to use people for their bodies. It can include pathologization and conversion, either personal or institutional. Have you checked your hormones? Is there some sort of trauma that caused this? Have you talked to a therapist about this? Have you talked to your doctor? Is there a cure? In the case of a doctor talking to you, would you like me to cure you? And finally, sexual violence, or what is often called corrective rape, which is the idea that if you're asexual, all you need is for someone to rape you to realize that, in fact, you do want to have sex. And this is not hypothetical. According to the 2015 Asexual Community Census, 43.5% of those ACEs surveyed reported past sexual violence. And of those, of that 43.5%, half of them experienced it with romantic partners. Sort of pressure within relationships accounts for a lot of sexual violence in the ACE community. In the 2018 census, so 3 years later, 79.5 of those surveyed reported sexual violence. So 4 out of 5 asexuals reported that they had experienced sexual violence. Unless you think a lot of this aphobia is sort of hypothetical, just the ones that I've underlined on this slide are ones that I have personally experienced. And unfortunately, the majority of these have come from within queer communities as well. And I just want to note that although I have sort of stacked this from sort of the most, oh, somebody didn't validate your identity properly to the most serious sexual violence, all of these are sort of interlinked as well. And my example of this is that the DSM has listed as a disorder hypoactive sexual desire disorder. The DSM has this listed as an illness that can and should be treated. After years of ACE activism, but it did take a really long time, it was only in 2013 that this changed. That diagnosis of hypoactive sexual desire disorder, a lack or insufficient amount of sexual desire, now has a caveat that says that it only needs to be treated if this lack of sexual desire causes distress, and that a physician or psychiatrist should not diagnose with someone with someone with HSDD if they self-identify as asexual. So if you can say to your doctor, I identify as asexual, they can't diagnose you with this disease of HSDD. But of course, invisibility and erasure may mean that ACEs don't always know that asexuality even is a valid sexual orientation, and therefore may not have the vocabulary to self-identify in that way. So if you have never heard the word asexual and you just think that you weirdly don't have desire, you might get diagnosed as a problem just because you don't have access to that identity. Likewise, someone may experience distress, which is one of the criteria in the DSM, over their lack of desire only because of societal pressure. They don't want to be dehumanized. They've believed all this sort of erasing talk. Or they may feel distress because of persistent pressure to have sex with a romantic partner, even if it's not something they really want. Those sorts of distress from sort of structural pressure to perform sexually could then lead to a diagnosis of HSDD and therefore conversion therapy. So this is why we think about all of these forms of aphobia, even if some of them seem a little bit minor, because they are intimately connected. This is why invisibility, again, even though it seems minor, is a problem. There's a reason that AVEN is still AVEN, focused on visibility and education. Having that identification, knowing about the existence of asexuality, allows defense against institutional misdiagnoses. It also just helps people not feel broken, and it gives access to community. As someone who came to asexuality very late in my life, I only heard the word when I was nearly 30. I'm really sad that I missed out on decades of community I could have had. Okay, on a lighter note, congratulations, you have now graduated ACE and Arrow 101. An image description, it's a silly GIF with hands throwing graduation hats in the air. We are now ready to move on to ACE and Arrow 201, which is ACE and Arrow Studies. And I've called this 201 not because I think it's like more complex than the kind of articulations of identity that happen within the community. It's more like I'm sort of shifting to a different register, and I'll come back to this point later. Okay, so key concepts in asexuality and aromantic studies. Let's start with asexuality. In asexuality studies, one of the most important concepts, it's sometimes called allonormativity, but usually what we talk about is compulsory sexuality. The first sort of academic to write about this is Christina Gupta, and she defines it as follows. Quote, the social norms and practices that both marginalize various forms of non-sexuality, such as a lack of sexual desire or behavior, and compel people to experience themselves as desiring subjects, take up sexual identities, and engage in sexual activity. Other important concepts, especially for thinking intersectionally about asexuality, include the concepts of desexualization and hypersexualization. Desexualization is sort of taking sexuality or sexual capacity away from different kinds of bodies and populations. Hypersexualization is sort of the projection of sexuality or sexual capacity onto different bodies and populations. So, as an example, Eunjung Kim, the scholar that I've named here, who works at the intersection of asexuality and disability studies, has pointed out the way that disabled people will often sort of alienate the ace community by saying, we are not asexual, we are human, we are fully human because we have sexual desires. And likewise, the ace community will sort of alienate the disabled community by saying asexuality is a healthy condition. And Eunjung Kim says, you know, rather than thinking about asexual sort of desexualizing disabilities, how can we think about bringing these two communities into dialogue? Likewise, Iana Hawkins Owen, who's one of the most important writers on the intersections of Blackness and asexuality, has these really interesting analyses thinking about the way that different figures of Black womanhood get both hypersexualized and desexualized. So the Mammy as the sort of desexualized Black woman, and the Jezebel as the hypersexualized Black woman. In the same way that patriarchy harms both men and women, and heteronormativity harms both heteros and queers, so compulsory sexuality is especially pernicious for asexuals, but also has harmed society more generally. There's a lot of overlap between compulsory sexuality and rape culture in ways that I will talk about later. When you get to aro studies, the sort of key concept there is amatonormativity, and this is coined by Elizabeth Brake. And she defines it as, quote, the assumptions that a central, exclusive, amorous relationship is normal for humans, in that it is a universally shared goal, and that such relationship is normative, in that it should be aimed at in preference to other relationship types. And the problem with the amatonormativity, as she notes, is that it prompts the sacrifice of other relationships to romantic love and marriages, and it relegates friendship and solitudinousness to cultural invisibility. And so likewise, amatonormativity harms everyone, not just aros. Even alloromantics who are in relationships, who are meant to sort of deprioritize everyone and everything else in their life that could be their village, right? Um, image ID, I have a screenshot of a website, acearobiblio.com, acearobiblio.com. Part of my work to sort of collect these academic theorizations and analyses in both academic spaces and in community spaces resulted in this website, which I put together with a grad student, Jenna McKellips, and an undergrad, Philomena, and which I still maintain, the Acera Biblio. And what this website does is allow people to locate relevant research and writing in asexuality and aromanticism studies. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the website itself, but I will just note that if you are just getting started in things Ace and Arrow, you can see the reading and teaching collection section. These are intended as sort of starter packs, the 5 best works on X topic that you might want to look at. And again, to be clear, when I called this section ACE 201, that was not to suggest that academic writing about queer identities is more advanced than what comes out of communities itself. The website includes both community theorizations and academic theorizations of ACE and ARO things. And you'll notice that most of the starter packs include a combination of academic and community writing as well. Um, the fact is, unfortunately, that aromanticism is still fairly under theorized as an academic field, and so a lot of the most sophisticated thinking about romantic identity is happening in Tumblr posts and blog posts rather than otherwise. You can search this bibliography by topics or tags. Please do make use of this if you want to learn more than I can say at you in 1 hour today. ACE and ARO studies as academic fields are especially exciting to me because they give us the opportunity to make our queer theory queerer, to avoid, as Benjamin Cahan put it over 10 years ago, the least queer aspect of queer theory, its tendency to turn other sexualities into same-sex alloeroticism. Combating not just compulsory heterosexuality in queer studies, but also compulsory sexuality as well as normativity, gives us an opportunity to open up queer studies and queer theory and see our objects of study anew. And a lot of the questions that I found myself thinking through this year as a McCain Fellow in the Queer Trans Research Lab has been thinking about what does sexual liberation actually mean? How can we expand that concept in queer studies, queer spaces, and beyond? And what can we do to prevent sex positivity from tipping into sex normativity? A lot of the work that I've been doing this year, and I won't talk about that very long because I have a lot of bossy things to tell you about how to be better to your ACE and ARO students. But this is some of the research that I'm working on this year. I've assembled a collection on early modern asexualities with my two co-editors, Catherine Clifford and Ali O'Meara. And then I've written 3 articles, one about metaphysical poetry as an asexual literary form, one thinking about the sort of surprising prevalence of what I call lack of love poetry, love poems written by people who begin by saying they've never experienced desire, and the way that those poems get erased in editorial traditions. And then one doing a sort of aromantic reading and thinking about what aromantic reading might look like, using Shakespeare's Much Ado as an example. Okay. Moving on from ACE research, I want to talk a little bit now in my final section about how to make things better for our ACE and ARO students in our university settings. Here is a list of sources that I used as I put this section together. This is places to go if you want to read more, although I'll summarize what I took away as the sort of takeaways in what follows. And I will note this article, if you only read one of them, sort of collates a lot of stuff that's sort of found in other articles. And I'm going to refer to that since it's written by Mollett, Valley, and Fitzsimmons as MVF in what follows. So if you see MVF in a slide, it's a quotation from that article. Okay, so here we go, how to be better to your ACE and ARO students in various different ways. Let's start with sort of general principles. Identities evolve, as do community discourses, which means both that the way people think about their identity will change. Someone's identity may personally evolve, but also the language we use to describe those identities will change. Vocabularies will change. So what I tell you today might not hold forever. Up until 2020, I was using the language of split attraction model. And then ARO bloggers demonstrated the problematic nature of that terminology, and so I've adapted my vocabulary accordingly. Following those discussions that are coming out of ACE and ARO communities and non-defensively listening to correction when it's offered is an important part of being an ally to ACE and ARO as well as other communities. General principles too, like any DEI work from a marginalized population, if you're asking for this labor, then you should pay for it. And don't worry, I'm being paid for it today. Okay, Beyond general principles, what does it mean to think about ACE and ARO inclusion in university environments? And this is a very silly image description. This came up on one of the ACE meme groups that I'm part of. Somebody was shopping Walmart and saw this ad that said ACE College Life and got all excited because they thought it was rep. But in fact, what it probably meant was succeed at college life, presumably by buying lots of things from Walmart. Okay, so how do we do this? Part one thing it would mean to make spaces more inclusive for ACE, especially students, is to avoid assumptions about and or normalizations of university spaces as hypersexualized. So sort of broad assumptions about everyone of a certain age having a lot of sex or having sex at all or having high libidos. Representations of university spaces and university parties in popular culture already sort of perpetuate this myth, which can make it more difficult for ACE students, especially to feel like they belong at university, right? Why do I want to enter somewhere where the expectation is all of this sex all the time? Partly for this reason, as well as reasons of invisibility, erasure, and pathologization. One study of asexual students in university settings has shown that ACE students are the most unlikely to access services, university services, particularly counseling services in university settings. And this is when they're compared both to hetero and to queer populations. The reason of this is, of course, primarily the pathological view of asexuality, which, as the second quotation on this slide note, causes many asexual people to resist discussing their sexual identity with mental health professionals out of fear of a wrongful diagnosis. I will note that this persists after university as well. One Airways group that I'm part of, one of the things that they did was try to compile a list of therapists that wouldn't try to cure you if you came out as ACE. Trying to find both health and mental health professionals that you know will not invalidate your identity if you come out as ACE or ARO is an ongoing project for many of us. And worry about people not understanding or not believing in the existence of asexuality means that even the resources that do exist already on university campuses may not get access by ACE and ARO students unless some of the larger assumptions and structural inequities are tackled first. So you can't just say we're going to have more counselors unless you take away the barriers to accessing that counseling. This is why one of the first things that you can do, that we can do, this is sort of the collective we of U of T faculty and staff in particular, is expand visibility of asexuality as an identity, as well as aromanticism as an identity. According to one study, despite the general assumptions that university campuses are hypersexualized, more than 5% of university students identify as asexual. That's 1 out of 20 students. If you teach a class of 45 students, 2 of them could be asexual. And yet, despite this fact, despite the fact that 5% of university students' ID is somewhere on the asexual spectrum, there's very little knowledge of the mere existence of asexuality and aromanticism on college campuses. And this is the second quotation on the slide, quote, "When we asked asexual and aromantic students what they wanted other people to know, many of their answers boiled down to just wanting people to know that they exist." And I'll get a bit more into what difference this would make in a little bit. But another reason that visibility is important is not only to validate those students who already ID as ACE, and I can't stress this enough, A-spec students who are on the ACE and or ARO spectrum, who don't have the knowledge that they are A-spec, who don't have that vocabulary, could literally have their lives transformed by exposure to this identity. That's what happened to me, although it happened far after university in my case. Having the vocabulary and the knowledge of the orientation, knowing that asexuality exists, that aromanticism exists, that both of them are valid, allows defense against institutional misdiagnoses. It helps people not feel broken. It removes isolation and it gives access to community. As someone who is in her 40s, I'm a member of several older ACEs groups. That's like a category we often call ourselves. And one of the common refrain in these older ACEs groups is discussions of how differently our lives might have unfolded if we knew that asexuality existed, if we had found it earlier in our lives. As I exist, as I mentioned, I didn't find it till I was around 30, which means that I spent the first part of my adult life deprived of the amazing community that I have now, feeling broken and feeling pressured to do things that I really didn't want to do. So it's not just, again, validating those who already know their ace, but exposing it to others. Help people know that asexuality and aromancy exist, that they are valid identities and ways of moving throughout the world. A little visibility can really go a long way. Last thing I'll say about visibility, the Positive Space logo and the U of T sort of standard queer acronym. At the U of T, we recently had a redesign of the Positive Space logo. We went from the stripes to the sort of tessellated triangles. Um, I think that's cool. I like the triangles. But one thing that didn't get changed is the sort of standard acronym. I, which often gets added to the acronym for intersex, and A, which can stand for asexual, aromantic, and agender, still are not included. We sort of end at Q plus. I'm really grateful for this opportunity to make a pitch for adding those two letters. And again, I often wonder how my life would have unfolded differently if I'd seen an A or even the word asexual and learned of the identity a decade earlier than I have. To those in the talk who are not part of the Sexual and Gender Diversity Office, just a note to say that if you are writing promotional materials and you want to include the queer community, consider adding those two letters, I and A, to the end of the acronym when you're sending out posters. Saying an event will be open to two LGBTQIA plus rather than not stopping at the Q could make a big difference. Okay, beyond visibility, let's talk about acceptance. So image description, this slide shows a screenshot from an article about asexuality at university, where a quotation from an asexual student says, quote, "People almost never say okay after you say asexual. Coming out stories involve responses like, have you checked your hormones? Don't say that, you'll find somebody," and so on. It's really hard to come out of the closet when you know that most people are going to react by trying to stuff you back in. This article continues that reactions like this are why many ACE college students don't share their identities, including to mental health professionals on campus. The moral is that you simply need to trust students if they trust you enough to come out to you as asexual and or aromantic. If someone comes out to you as ace or aro, believe their disclosures. Their identities are not up for negotiation or debate. This means avoiding questions or responses like, how do you know, or are you sure? Maybe you haven't met the right person yet. Have you had your hormones checked? Responses like this not only invalidate their identities, they also reinforce harmful norms like compulsory sexuality and heteronormativity. As researchers on ACE and ARO experience on university campuses point out, students often do extensive labor and research, usually in online communities, to try and understand their identities, energy that could be directed towards their education. And speaking of education, one thing we can all do to support ACE and ARO students is prevent them from having to do so much work. Both so much work to educate others, but also to learn about things for themselves. Disclosure of an ace or identity, coming out, like any other kinds of coming out, has cost. It can result in discrimination, in erasure, in exposure to witting or unwitting aphobia, assumptions of sex negativity, and frankly, exhaustion. Having to constantly educate people about something fundamental to yourself and to millions of people around the world, having to explain over and over, no, I'm not sex negative. It just gets really tiring. we can take away those burdens of visibility and the work of education from ACE and ARO students. Or, as Mollett Valley and Fitzsimmons put it, quote, educators should take responsibility for ending the invisibility of asexuality and reducing the burden and labor demanded from ACE and ARO students. Here's a really easy way to do this. Consider celebrating one of our self-appointed celebratory days and weeks. ACE Week is the last full week of October every year. This year it will be October 26th through November 1st. Aromantic Spectrum Awareness Week is the first full week after Valentine's Day. This year it's February 16th to 22nd. And International Asexuality Day is April 6th every year. Beyond those 15 days, if we could ask for 340 more, there are other ways of making more inclusive spaces as well. If you're in staff, one thing that Amanda Mollett suggests is including asexuality in events that are already happening. So the example on the slide suggests if doing a program on sexual violence training on a college campus includes specific statistics on aspectrum students' experience with sexual violence as well. If you're faculty, consider reading up on and teaching about asexuality and aromanticism in your classes, especially if you're already talking about allosexuality or alloromanticism as well. As the quotation on the slide says, quote, if faculty and co-curricular instructors discuss sexual or romantic relationships in their curricula in any way, they should also discuss asexuality, aromanticism, and the issues these populations face. This can remove some of the emotional labor that ACE and ARO students often have to endure to make their identities intelligible to others. I will say anecdotally that a lot of the ASPEC undergrads at the U of T who have found me, because I teach classes on this topic and I offer work study positions in these topics, a lot of the ASPEC undergrads at the U of T who take queer studies courses have told me that they don't see themselves reflected in these classes, and that faculty teaching these kind of classes don't really know how to answer questions about asexuality and aromanticism if and when they come up. I often hear, one of the things I hear all the time from undergrads is surprise that this is something they were even allowed to study at the university level. If you are faculty, especially if you are faculty teaching queer content, hopefully this lecture is giving you some places to start, both in knowing how to answer questions about ACE and ARO studies, but also in introducing it yourself as a topic and not just reacting to it if somebody asks you a question. Another thing we can do is avoid normalization for both faculty and staff, but again, especially faculty teaching and training others in queer subjects. The ask I'm making here is ultimately very modest. The simple acknowledgement of different kinds of lives and levels of attraction and desire as valid ways of living. What this means is trying to avoid assumptions or statements about certain levels of attraction or desire as normal or essentially human, whether that be romantic or sexual attraction. Try to avoid assumptions or statements that anyone not in a relationship is lonely and that the couple is the ultimate goal or the prime way of relating. And try to avoid having sex positivity, the idea that consensual sex is a good thing in society. Slip into sex normativity, which would be the assumption that sex is sort of the paradigmatic good, and that it's a sign of liberation, and that its lack or absence is bad or a sign of repression or conservative views. Remember that sexual liberation, if it is actually going to be liberatory, must have the potential to be liberation to have sex as much as one wants. And if that includes, as well, to not have sex if one does not want it. We can think about what we can do to build queer, ACE, and ARO communities. Make explicit that queer communities are open to and inclusive of asexuals and aromantics as well. And I will say this is actually very important. It seems minor, but it's important because a lot of aces and arrows have been burned when they try to enter into queer communities being told that we don't belong. Exclusion from queer spaces is also an ongoing topic in our online discussion. So even if somebody hasn't tried it yet themselves, they will hear that it's a problem for others. Do not assume that ASPEC students will feel safe in your queer space without explicit recognition and invitation. If you're putting on queer events, organize some that don't revolve around dating, coupling, finding partners, and so on. And in addition to making sure that queer spaces are inclusive of aces and arrows, also consider making spaces or teaching classes that focus on ace and arrows exclusively rather than just sort of lumping them in with queerness more generally. So sort of both and we want to be recognized as part of the queer community, but sometimes we need to be in community with one another. I will note as well, though, that a lot of these discussions of community building need to be conscious of other issues as well, including how things like race, disability, and neurodivergent can affect someone's desire or ability to even claim asexuality as an orientation. One of the best pieces I found to think about this is Iana Hawkins Owens' theorizations of the intersection between asexuality and race. And I put the citation at the bottom of the slide. As Owen says, quote, if we name the implication that that asexuality is a kind of human possibility, we begin to see the fissures in asexuality as an agentive category of self-identification for bodies whose humanity is not a given. And here he references the sort of 3/5 rule in American history. We must contend with issues of abjection and dominance in order to broach asexual interactions with Blackness, the human possibility of asexuality, unmarked as such, so the human assumed unmarked and is therefore assumed as white, becomes unstable when affiliated with Black and other racialized bodies. Content warming, the next few slides are going to talk about both sexual violence and conversion once again. Everyone, not only ASPECs, should work on challenging compulsory sexuality and rape culture. Asexual students in particular are especially vulnerable to sexual violence, with research showing that ACE University students experience sexual violence at higher rates than other students, both queer and cishet alike. And Mollett Black finding that, quote, nearly 1 in 4 asexual college students experience coercive rape, over half experience unwanted sexual contact, and 70% experience non-contact unwanted sexual experiences. For example, like dick pics. They also found that race significantly increased the odds of students experiencing certain types of violence. The violence, Catherine Meyer adds, that asexual people experience related to their identity needs to be taken into consideration when thinking about how to improve the collegiate experience for asexual students. But as Sharonda Brown has argued in their book Refusing Compulsory Sexuality, a Black asexual lens on our sex-obsessed culture, this problem, the problem of compulsory sexuality, is not a problem only for ACEs or for ACE students. Challenging compulsory sexuality means taking consent seriously and challenging rape culture more generally. This is a long quotation, but I'm going to read all of it because I think it's important. Quote, under compulsory sexuality, the desires of those with normative sexual urges are prioritized. It's a belief system that eschews consent and preaches instant gratification for people who want sex, but cares not for the safety, comfort, health, or autonomy of people who do not. It doesn't just ask us to comply. It asks us to make ways for others to demand, manipulate, coerce, and force us into situations in which we are expected to disregard our own well-being for the sake of normality. Challenges made against the existence and validity of asexuality are inherently challenges to sexual boundaries and consent as a whole. An image description, I have a picture of the front cover of Sharonda J. Brown's book, as well as the cover of Angela Chen's book, Ace. Both of these books, I think, are necessary reading, particularly within Angela Chen's book, the chapter entitled The Good Enough Reason, which challenges the prevailing expectation that someone should consent to sex with a partner if they're already in a relationship, unless they can articulate a good enough reason not to. What we learned from both of these is that thinking about sexual violence, not just especially sexual violence on university campuses, not just in terms of what happens at university parties with alcohol present, but also thinking about and challenging forms of coercion within relationships, is important for all students, not just ACE and ARROW ones. As Maud and Black argue, quote, an asexual lens allows us to think about the fact that coercion through substances is less prevalent than verbal coercion. These intentional and manipulative forms of coercion reinforce the need for expanding definitions, education, and expectations around healthy relationships and affirmative consent. Okay, I'm nearly done, I promise. Another really important concept that I think will help us think about this, and which I first discovered in ACE and ARROW communities, are the two escalators, the touch escalator and the relationship escalator. Being able to understand and then challenge these two escalators are also important to challenging compulsory sexuality and normativity. An image description, you're sort of looking at an escalator that's going up a tunnel from the bottom. Once you get on, you are sort of forced all the way to the top. The touch escalator, in short, is the idea that allowing one kind of intimacy implicitly grants permission for other kind of intimacies. So think about this in terms of the way we talk about bases when describing different forms of sexual contact. But if there were like a moving walkway between the bases, so as soon as you start thinking about going to first base, the expectation is that unless something really dramatic happens, unless you have a good enough reason you can articulate and that your partner will accept, you are consenting to eventually having sex. A lot of aces, especially allo-romantic aces who are navigating relationships with allosexual partners, spend a lot of time and energy trying to turn this touch escalator into a set of stairs, right? So rather than saying, if I allow this form of touching, it implies that I'm willing to go that far, saying, no, it's not an escalator, it's a set of stairs. You can then work to define boundaries and articulate how many steps up this escalator you feel comfortable taking. Likewise, the relationship escalator. The expectation is that dating someone leads to exclusive dating, leads to monogamy, cohabitation, and marriage, or something sort of permanent like marriage as the ultimate sort of romantic pinnacle. Again, the general assumption, unless challenged or addressed, is that any sort of romantic action or activity, like going out on dates, for example, implies the eventual intention to be in a committed, long-term, exclusive romantic relationship. Turning these escalators into stairs, being able to articulate where you want to go and how high is important for arrows, but also for everyone. And of course, for most people who don't bother differentiating kinds of attraction, these two escalators are one escalator only, right? So that, for example, going on a date with somebody might be taken as consent to eventually having sex with them. Articulating these as two different sets of expectations that can be treated separately and not just treated as a bundle is also important. Having frank discussions about what different partners want out of a relationship, what they are and are not comfortable with, and what their boundaries are, is something that aces and arrows are really good at, but again, is something that would potentially benefit all relationships. And this is my final slide. I want to end on a note of asexual education. So learning more about asexuality and aromanticism is the first step to building supportive spaces for your ASPEC students, who again, according to one study, make up about 5% of the student population. But also learning more about ace and arrow things means learning from the ace and arrow people in your life. We are really good at interrogating and articulating social norms and assumptions that affect us all. As the slide says, quote, asexual and aromantic students spend far more time discussing needs, ways of expressing affection, boundaries, and consent as part of their relationship. This dynamic approach to network relationships among intimacy, boundaries, needs, and consent would, of course, aid us all. For that reason, aces and arrows should be celebrated and learned from in queer campus spaces, not sidelined or treated as deficient. So in short, if you've taken nothing else away from this talk, please let me end on a note of invitation. Well, I started this section by inviting you to learn for us, to educate yourself and others, to take away some of that burden from your ASPEC students. I'd like to end by inviting you to learn with us and from us so that we can build a more inclusive campus community together. And so to that end, just a reminder on a few places you can go to do this learning. Here again is the slide showing the articles I found that speak to asexuality, not really the much aromanticism, but asexuality in college spaces, university context specifically. I'll leave it up there in case you want to screenshot it. Other learning opportunities this year, I am co-leading with the magnificent Theo Northcraft, a working group on ace and arrow studies as an academic field, and you can email me if you are interested in joining. For both academic work and community discussions of all things ACE and Arrow. Again, please feel free to consult acearrowbiblio.com. If you're just getting started, reading and teaching collections will give you a couple sort of starter packs, or you can also go to the bibliography itself and search tags for subtopics you're interested in. Here you can see the reading and teaching collections we currently have. Image description, it's a screenshot of the RTC page. Different options include Introduction to ACE Theory, Introduction to Aromantic Theory, Asexuality and Autism, Trans and Asexual Puberty, Asexuality and Race, and so on. You can also email me directly. My email is liza, Liza.blake, BLAKE, @utoronto.ca. And I believe that we are also now transitioning into a discussion session. So I'd be happy to do my best to answer any questions you might have in that period. I can also walk you through how the Ace Hero Biblio website works if you want, but I think that I have done more than enough talking, so I will stop here.